There have always been some people to love, really love. And we always say, of course, it's the...
Susan Seaforth Hayes entered the world in 1943 during a time when families were being torn apart as quickly as they were formed. Her father had been shipped overseas for World War II, just months after marrying her mother, leaving Susan to be born into a household shaped more by longing than certainty. Even before she understood the concept of war, she lived with the feeling of someone missing, a weight that settled into the walls of her childhood home. Her mother carried the strain of separation while trying to raise a child alone in a world still bracing itself against global conflict. That early emotional instability quietly shaped Susan's instincts, giving her a sensitivity that later translated powerfully on screen. She didn't yet know that the fractures in her earliest years would one day give her the emotional range that millions would recognize. But everything started with that silence left behind by a father at war. When the war ended, the brief attempt at rebuilding her family didn't last. Susan's mother, Elizabeth Harrower, chose not to fade into the shadows of a failed marriage. Instead, she ran toward Hollywood with renewed ambition, bringing her young daughter directly into the chaos of an industry built on dreams and disappointment. Studio lots became Susan's playground, though nothing about them was simple. Actors hustled from one audition to another, scripts changed by the hour, and the air was always thick with both hope and tension. Elizabeth juggled roles, rewrites, and late-night rehearsals, teaching Susan by example that perseverance was the only real currency in show business. Watching her mother fight for opportunities gave Susan a blueprint for survival in a world that rarely offered security. She wasn't just tagging along, she was learning how this industry breathed. Those lessons would become essential for everything that followed. Susan didn't have a conventional childhood. Instead of bedtime stories, she heard actors rehearsing dialogue through thin studio walls. Instead of playgrounds, she wandered backstage corridors filled with props, costumes, and exhausted performers. She saw directors correcting lines, writers pacing with frustration, and actors negotiating emotions with a precision she absorbed long before she grasped their meaning. The subtleties of timing, tone, and physical presence were lessons she picked up without ever sitting in a classroom. By simply watching, she developed an intuition for performance that many adult actors struggle to acquire. The more she observed, the stronger her desire became to step into those scenes herself. Hollywood wasn't just a backdrop to her childhood. It was an education disguised as chaos. And as she watched others transform into characters, she began imagining the moment she would finally step into the light. That moment arrived sooner than she expected. When Susan appeared on Cavalcade of America, at just 11 years old, her years of silent training became suddenly visible. She walked onto the set with the confidence of someone who had spent her life studying the mechanics of performance. The role was small, but the impact was significant. She earned her SAG card, received her first paycheck, and discovered the thrill of contributing to a story rather than observing one. The experience confirmed what she had always sensed, that she belonged inside this world. Yet her early achievements were shadowed by the realities of her personal life. Her father's absence had become permanent, and her mother's relentless pursuit of work required Susan to grow up quickly. That early maturity became both her armor and her advantage, helping her navigate an industry that demanded resilience. Even as a child, she felt as though every opportunity carried weight. She wasn't just acting, she was building her future. Susan's commitment to her craft deepened when she began taking method acting classes at 12. Babysitting money paid for lessons that would shape her entire career. In those dim studios filled with aspiring performers, she learned how to turn personal memories into emotional power. Method acting forced her to confront the loneliness, uncertainty, and longing that had colored her early life, and then channel those feelings into characters who needed truth more than perfection. She discovered how to hold a viewer's attention not by exaggerating emotions, but by allowing them to surface naturally. This discipline became one of her greatest tools, giving her performances a depth that resonated long before she became a household name. While other teens were focused on school dances and weekend plans, Susan was studying breath control, emotional recall, and vulnerability. And just as she was mastering these tools, her mother's career shifted in a way that would draw Susan even deeper into the heart of storytelling. As Susan honed her skills, her mother's career shifted into a direction that would reshape both of their futures. Elizabeth Harrower transitioned from acting into writing for soaps, entering a world where story arcs stretched across months and characters evolved with painstaking care. Susan sat quietly during script readings at home, absorbing the rhythm of dialogue, the structure of tension, and the pacing required to keep viewers returning day after day. She learned how writers built emotional turns and planted moments that would erupt episodes later. Few young performers had such access to the creative engine behind a show. This insider's view gave her a rare advantage. She understood the architecture of storytelling long before she became one of its central figures. Watching her mother struggle through deadlines and rewrites taught her discipline, but it also gave her a deeper belief that she could claim a place in this world. And soon, opportunity arrived. As the early 1960s unfolded, Susan's resume grew at a pace that startled even seasoned casting agents. She appeared in historical reenactments, Cold War dramas, and anthology shows that demanded quick emotional pivots. Producers admired how easily she adapted to different tones. One week, she played a frightened colonial girl. The next, a teenager caught in international intrigue. Each role was a puzzle piece in a larger picture she was still learning to see. Susan didn't chase fame. She chased experience, knowing every appearance sharpened her instincts. Directors noted her ability to follow subtle cues, to shift expression with a natural ease usually seen in older actors. By the time she reached her late teens, she wasn't simply another young performer auditioning for scraps. She was earning a reputation as a dependable, intuitive presence who could elevate a scene. And the next role would prove exactly how far her emotional power could reach. In 1956, at just 13, Susan delivered a performance that made Hollywood pause. Playing Melanie in an emotional episode of Lassie, she carried a monologue that demanded genuine vulnerability. The scene unfolded slowly, her voice trembling with a realism uncommon for young actors of that era. Producers replayed the footage repeatedly, startled by how naturally she conveyed sorrow. When the episode aired, millions of viewers saw a young girl who didn't just act, she felt. Fan letters trickled in, then grew, revealing how deeply her honesty resonated with families across the country. That moment didn't simply add another credit to her name, it shifted her trajectory. For the first time, casting directors recognized her not as a child surrounded by the industry, but as a performer with rare emotional clarity. The impact of that episode rippled outward, setting the stage for opportunities that demanded more range and far more courage. The late 1950s and early 1960s brought Susan into the world of Western television, where she continued to expand the boundaries of her talent. She appeared on The Life and Legend of Wyatt Earp, Wagon Train, and other frontier dramas that dominated American evenings. In one role, she even performed a folk tune live on camera, revealing a musicality that producers hadn't known she possessed. These shows attracted massive weekly audiences, pushing her visibility even higher. Each appearance taught her new skills, pacing through outdoor scenes, managing long takes, holding emotional tension in quieter moments. Viewers responded to her warmth, while directors admired her professionalism. These roles didn't bring overnight stardom, but they strengthened something more important: her ability to adapt quickly, deliver consistently, and understand what audiences connected with. And just as she was mastering this gritty frontier world, another opportunity appeared, one that would define her as fearless. Her appearance on The Man from UNCLE added a daring new layer to her reputation. Playing a character drawn into espionage chaos, she performed several of her own stunts, surprising a crew accustomed to working with doubles. They warned her about the risks, but Susan refused to step back, insisting that authenticity mattered. Her determination impressed everyone on set, especially the director, who noted how naturally she embraced physical storytelling. When the episode aired, viewers were captivated by her mix of vulnerability and boldness, a balance that many actors struggled to achieve. This role marked a turning point. Susan was no longer simply the girl with emotional range. She was someone willing to push herself beyond comfort to serve the story. The industry took notice, and just ahead of her lay a role that would demand every ounce of skill, discipline, and depth she had developed since childhood. By the late 1960s, Susan stepped into a role that revealed an entirely different layer of her talent. Her appearance on The Wild Wild West showcased her in a far bolder light than audiences had seen before. Playing Delilah, she navigated a storyline filled with mischief, charm, and a hint of seduction that caught viewers off guard. It wasn't just the costume or the playful confidence she brought to the screen, it was the shift in her presence. She carried herself with a maturity that signaled she was no longer a young girl simply learning the craft. The performance sparked a wave of fan mail and showed producers that she could command attention in roles that required sophistication and emotional nuance. Westerns were a dominant force at the time, and her standout appearance placed her firmly on the radar of casting directors seeking versatile actors. And that momentum was about to meet the opportunity she'd been quietly preparing for her entire life. By the time Susan reached her early 20s, she had amassed more than 30 television appearances, an accomplishment few performers her age could match. Each role strengthened her range, from courtroom dramas to family sitcoms and suspense-driven anthologies. She shifted accents with ease, adjusted her posture to suit characters twice her age, and delivered emotional beats that made producers trust her with increasingly complex scenes. While other young actors struggled to break through, Susan appeared to glide across genres, collecting skills that would later prove invaluable. Her presence on major shows like Perry Mason and Bonanza made her a familiar face to millions of households, even if her name wasn't yet widely recognized. Behind the scenes, directors admired her discipline, noting how she absorbed notes quickly and delivered consistently under pressure. This rare combination of talent and reliability positioned her perfectly for the next chapter, one that would change not only her career, but the landscape of daytime television itself. In 1968, everything shifted when Susan walked onto the set of Days of Our Lives to play Julie Olson. She wasn't the first actress cast in the role, she was the fourth, but within weeks, it became clear she would be the last. Susan brought a mix of rebellion, charm, and emotional unpredictability that immediately resonated with viewers. Julie wasn't written as a groundbreaking character, but Susan transformed her into one. Her early storyline involving a secret pregnancy pushed boundaries daytime television had rarely touched, stirring debate among conservative groups and captivating younger audiences. For the first time, a soap character felt modern, flawed, and relatable. Susan's performance drew viewers in because she played Julie with depth rather than melodrama, She understood the heartbeat of the character, her longing, her stubbornness, her vulnerability, and let those traits shape every line. What she didn't know was that this role would become the anchor of her career for more than 5 decades. As Julie's storylines grew bolder, Susan found herself at the center of some of the most talked-about moments in daytime television. The romance between Julie and David Martin, the rebellious choices, the impulsive near elopements, these twists pushed against the limits of what soaps typically portrayed. Religious groups protested, criticizing the show for depicting divorce and unconventional relationships. Yet the controversy only made Julie more compelling to viewers. Susan leaned into the emotional complexity of the role, portraying a young woman torn between desire, pressure, and expectation. Her authenticity made even the most dramatic storylines believable, turning Julie into a character audiences rooted for, even when they disagreed with her choices. These early arcs not only cemented Susan's place in the show, but also demonstrated her ability to elevate material through sheer emotional truth. And just as the audience was settling into the rhythm of Julie's turmoil, a behind-the-scenes shift would reshape everything. In 1970, Susan's mother, Elizabeth Harrower, became the head writer for Days of Our Lives, a moment that brought both opportunity and risk. Elizabeth crafted deeper, more emotionally driven storylines for Julie, pushing Susan into scenes that demanded raw vulnerability. Courtroom battles, family betrayals, and spiraling conflicts gave the character an entirely new dimension, and Susan rose to the challenge with performances that felt painfully authentic. Yet working under her mother also brought scrutiny from cast and crew who wondered whether Susan received special treatment. The truth was far more complicated. Elizabeth wrote tough material because she believed Susan could handle it, even when the emotional toll was heavy. Their partnership created some of the show's most memorable arcs, blending family dynamics with professional ambition. But the most dramatic shift was still ahead, one that would combine on-screen passion with off-screen truth in a way no one could have predicted. Julie's next storyline pushed her into even sharper territory, stealing her sister's fiancé, a decision that stunned viewers and shifted her character from troubled youth to fully realized adult. But what the audience didn't know was that something deeper was happening behind the scenes. Susan and Bill Hayes, who played Doug Williams, had begun developing a connection that transcended scripted lines. Their chemistry wasn't manufactured. It simmered beneath every scene, creating an intensity that writers quickly leaned into. Fans sensed something real, even before the show officially paired Doug and Julie. The combination of scandal on screen and unspoken emotion off-screen created a magnetic pull that elevated the couple into TV's earliest version of a super couple. Susan's fan club exploded, reaching thousands, and viewers tuned in not just for plot twists, but to feel the spark between two actors whose growing affection was quietly shifting the show's direction. And then came the moment that changed everything. In 1970, a single scene transformed Susan's career and the entire dynamic of Days of Our Lives. When Julie and Doug shared their first on-screen kiss, the electricity was unmistakable, and for good reason. It was also Susan and Bill's first real kiss in their actual lives. The camera captured something raw and unfiltered, a moment so genuine that viewers responded instantly. Ratings shot up by 20% as millions replayed the episode, trying to understand what made the kiss feel different from every soap romance they'd seen before. Behind the scenes, crew members exchanged knowing glances. Something real had broken through. Neither Susan nor Bill fully understood the consequences of allowing their truths to slip onto the screen, but the audience felt it immediately. That kiss didn't just launch a storyline, it ignited a cultural moment. And soon, their private love would intertwine with public obsession in ways neither expected. As Doug and Julie's romance deepened on screen, Susan and Bill's real relationship grew in quiet corners, away from the scripts and cameras. They protected it fiercely, knowing any hint of off-screen involvement could spark controversy or accusations of favoritism. In 1974, after 2 years of secrecy, they married privately in Bill's living room with just 16 guests present. Fans remained unaware until later, but their wedding marked the merging of real life and fiction in a way that reshaped the show's legacy. When Doug and Julie married on television in 1976, the event became a national sensation. It landed on the cover of Time magazine, and viewers hosted living room celebrations across the country. For many, Doug and Julie symbolized hope, passion, and resilience during an era when soap couples rarely achieved cultural status. Yet behind all the glamour, Susan and Bill carried the weight of maintaining a public romance built from intensely private beginnings. With fame came storylines that demanded everything from Susan, emotionally, physically, and mentally. One of her most grueling arcs involved Julie being kidnapped, a sequence filled with chase scenes that required a level of physical endurance few soap actors faced. Susan insisted on performing many moments herself, refusing pain medication when she was injured, so her reactions would remain real. Her commitment didn't go unnoticed. She earned Emmy nominations for arcs involving betrayal, heartbreak, and Julie's emotional unraveling after tragic losses. But the pressure intensified as fans became fiercely attached to her character's every move. Even negative reactions, like the uproar over Julie's infidelity plot, only proved how deeply audiences cared. Susan walked a tightrope between artistic challenge and public expectation, balancing the demands of a daily show with performances that reached millions. And just when she seemed to be thriving within that pressure, a storyline emerged that would test her endurance more than any before. In 1979, Susan faced one of the most physically and emotionally draining story arcs of her career. Her character, Julie, suffered severe facial burns in a kitchen fire, an ordeal written in part by her own mother, Elizabeth. The prosthetics required hours of application each morning, glued directly to her skin, with adhesives that caused relentless burning and itching. Dermatologists warned her the chemicals could trigger permanent beard growth. Yet Susan continued, believing realism mattered more than comfort. The storyline was intended to last 6 weeks, but its impact stretched across months, forcing her to endure the discomfort daily while delivering some of the rawest scenes of her career. The emotional weight mirrored her mother's own past traumas, making the performance even heavier to carry. Viewers were shaken by the authenticity of her screams and vulnerability. What they didn't know was just how real the pain behind those scenes had been. And soon, the pressure around her would reach a breaking point. In 1984, Susan faced one of the most unexpected blows of her career. Budget cuts forced the show to release several actors, and to the disbelief of both cast and viewers, she was among those cut. Julie was abruptly written off, fleeing to Europe with almost no emotional closure. Fans felt blindsided, furious that a character who had shaped the identity of Days of Our Lives for over a decade could be dismissed so abruptly. Letters poured into NBC by the thousands. A petition grew to more than 50,000 signatures, one of the largest fan uprisings in soap history. Producers hadn't anticipated the backlash. They underestimated the bond viewers had with both Susan and Julie, two identities now deeply intertwined. The uproar forced executives to reconsider their decision. Within months, pressure mounted so intensely that they brought her back, confirming the undeniable truth: the show's heart was never designed to function without her. When Susan returned in 1990, Days of Our Lives handed her one of the most challenging storylines of her career: Julie's frightening battle with cancer. Soap operas often touched heavy themes lightly, but this arc demanded authenticity. To honor the experience of those facing the disease, Susan shaved her hair on camera, an act of vulnerability that startled viewers and critics alike. Some argued the storyline softened the harsh realities of the illness, while others praised Susan's raw, emotional portrayal for sparking necessary conversations in living rooms across America. Her performance walked a narrow line between grief and hope, revealing a fragility audiences hadn't seen from her before. Despite mixed reactions, it cemented her reputation as an actress who was unafraid to step into painful territory. But behind the scenes, the emotional toll was significant. Susan carried the weight of the storyline long after filming ended. And just as she steadied herself again, another storm was forming, one far more personal. By 1992, tensions behind the scenes escalated, leading to another painful exit. A contract dispute triggered Susan's second firing, and tabloids immediately twisted the situation into tales of diva behavior and on-set conflict. None of it reflected the truth, but the rumors spread quickly, leaving a mark she had to quietly endure. Instead of retreating, Susan transformed the setback into a period of reinvention. She joined the young and the restless as Joanna Manning, a sharp, manipulative character whose intensity thrilled viewers. Her layered performance earned her award nominations and reminded audiences of her commanding range. She also made appearances on The Bold and the Beautiful and Sunset Beach, proving she could step into any soap universe and instantly elevate the material. These years were exhausting, but liberating. They showed Susan she wasn't bound to a single role. Yet despite her success elsewhere, one part of her remained tethered to Julie, the character who had defined her, and fate would soon pull her back once more. By the 2000s, Susan had become a living pillar of daytime television. She returned to Days of Our Lives in several major arcs, embracing storylines that demanded more emotional truth than ever before. Her work in the dementia storyline, where Julie slowly lost her memories and at times failed to recognize Doug, struck viewers with an ache that felt uncomfortably real. In truth, Bill Hayes was beginning his own quiet battle with memory decline, giving Susan's performance a heartbreaking authenticity. In 2018, Susan and Bill received the Lifetime Achievement Emmy, a moment that felt bigger than an award. It honored decades of storytelling, love, and shared artistry. Susan wept openly on stage, thanking her mother for shaping her path. The recognition wasn't just for the character she created, it was for the woman who had carried the weight of the industry on her shoulders and never once stopped giving herself fully to the craft. But her most personal challenge was still ahead. In January 2024, Susan faced the loss she had feared for years. Bill Hayes, her partner in both life and art, passed away at age 98. Their final chapter together unfolded quietly, far from the cameras that had once celebrated their every romantic turn. When Susan returned to film Julie's farewell to Doug, she delivered an unscripted sob so real that production halted. Viewers later said they felt the grief through the screen, recognizing it wasn't only Julie mourning Doug, it was Susan mourning Bill. By 2025, she held the record as the longest-serving cast member in Days of Our Lives history, a staggering 57 years as Julie Olson. At 82, she finally allowed herself to acknowledge the truth she'd protected for half a century, that the legendary love story which captivated millions had roots in a secret fragile romance born from a single kiss in 1970. A kiss that wasn't scripted. It was real, and it changed everything.